Hi there. If you're watching this, that means that you're trying to play the Restless, my card game. And you either want to play it by doing a DIY print and play version, or you want to play it online. This will cover the entire game, but obviously I'm working with the print and play version here. I will eventually have it online. There's going to be a few differences for that. First being that the backs of the cards are going to actually have art on them, and they're not going to be color-coded, obviously, in the game. So I will keep this very simple. I know that this video is probably very long, and it looks like there's a lot of rules, but I swear to God, this is just a very, very simple game. The rules are long because I wanted to include as many edge cases as I could so that people don't have to, make it up as they go along. But it is a very simple game. The entire thing is designed to be played from the cards in your hand. Once you understand how the whole thing works, like the flow of the game, it's super easy. Don't be intimidated. You're going to be totally fine. I literally designed this game so that my mom would be able to play it. Which is funny because my mom absolutely just destroys me at every other card game. But that's a story for another time. The core of the game is pretty simple. There are 1 to 4 players, generally speaking 4. 4 is best. You get character cards. Each character has a special power, they have special stats, and they have a special trait. We'll get more into details later. As you play the game, you go through 4 realms of the 5 realms. I don't know why I said 4. The game consists of 5 realms. The world, each one getting increasing difficulty. Each realm, generally speaking, has 5 encounters. Each encounter is either a combat encounter or a non-combat encounter, mostly combat. As you fight, you will be rewarded with a variety of different things. There are status effects that are always good. They heal you, they shield you from damage, they generally are just like protective spells types of things. You also get reroll counters, which I'm using pennies, you use whatever you want. You can get loot, which I have a yellow deck here, yours might not be yellow, and treasures. And treasures are rarer and very, very good to get. So as you play, you do take damage, and there's a lot of different parts in the game where there's going to be like a cost for whatever you're doing. You're going to be getting hit a lot. And most of the game you're going to be spending with not a lot of health. So healing is very, very important. One of the ways that you can heal is by just straight up item abilities. Sometimes an item will say, like, if anybody ever rolls a 17, somebody gets 1 point of health. The game is based around lateral thinking. So if you think that you can do it, if it seems like the cards are allowing you to do it, if I'm not specifically saying you can't do that, it's probably possible within the cards. There's a lot of different really clever ways to find synergies within these decks. But most of the healing, the big bunch of healing that happens all at once, is going to be happening while you're resting. However, this card game does take place during the last days of an infertility apocalypse, like literally the last 3 days of human extinction. So you only have 3 days that you can rest over this 25 encounter period. So you also have a deck of rest cards, and these are, they're mostly going to look like this, which is just a little sequence that happens, a little dream that happens while you're playing. It has a little bit of a benefit there, and then another rule there that we'll get into in more detail later. You get 3 of these, and you can never get any more by any means. There's 3 days left before everyone dies. This is the story of the game. At the end of the world, there are 5 traitor gods, which are very complicated, very intense fights. I'm working with the light here, that have multiple facets to them. They're very cool, and I'm very pleased with how they work. So when we want to get deeper into it, we should probably start by looking at the character cards. There are 20 characters in the game, and each one has unique stats, unique ability, and there are also 10 traits that you can have throughout the game. When you start, you pick, you have 4 people, let's say. You pick 6 characters. You always want to have 4 characters on the field. So you pick 2 of those 6 characters to discard, and then the team picks who they want to play from them. So let's start by looking at one of the first characters I designed, the Drim. Now the Drim might not have great stats, but the ability the Drim has is really, really powerful throughout the entire game. The Drim, like almost all of the characters in the game, only does 1 damage at a time. It can carry 5 points of weight, which isn't that much, and it only has 6 points of health, which isn't great. However, the ability here is when another character would take damage, you may direct it to yourself. There are tons of ways in the game to get armor, to increase your max health, to deflect incoming damage. And if the team just says, okay, every time we get one of those, we give it to the Drim can just intercept damage for everyone else throughout the whole game and just become like this pool of health that everyone else can rely on to shepherd the team through all of the future tribulations. The Drim also has an ability called Trapper. There are 10, or not an ability, it's a trait. There are 10 traits throughout the game, and when you find a card, say a loot card, sometimes encounters, lots of treasures, throughout the entire game there's going to be a lot of cards that have a special ability on them. So let me find one here, right here. Say your trait is you are an herbalist. If you find a loot card here, this is called Dried Veil Fat Leg. It weighs 1. It has a campfire on it, which means that you have to be resting when you use it. Normally, this restores 3 health twice. So you can restore 6 health to one person or 3 health to 2 different people. But if you are an herbalist, if you have the herbalist tag on your card, you can do this extra little thing here which says when this is discarded, when it's used up, you gain a reroll counter, which you use to reroll any roll that you don't like in the game. So the whole game is designed so that you always feel like you're being useful and actually contributing things to the game. The beauty of the characters is that there are a lot of interesting ways to like use them laterally and find cool synergies throughout the game. I mean, first game we had some really beautiful synergies that the Drim was a part of, as well as many others. But I want to highlight one of these here because it is a 4-player game and it goes by everybody taking turns. However, it's 4 people taking turns at a time in whatever order they want. You can go in staggered order, so long as everybody gets a chance to go before you reset and go again. Which means that you can really manipulate and break the game in a lot of different interesting ways. So we have the Congregant, who has this really powerful ability here. First off, their stats, doing 1 damage, just as most characters do. Carrying capacity of 8, which is really good, and 8 health, which is definitely on the high side. They are stout, so all the heavy items like really big swords, really big shields, as well as like anything that's really heavy, they will have special abilities that help them with that. But their ability here is the first time this damages a target, add +1 to all other characters' combat rolls until it is this character's turn again. So right from the outset, let's say you have 4 players in the game, right? You start with the first one here. That's the Congregant. The Congregant attacks and does damage, which means that the next player, the next player, and the next player all add +1 to their combat rolls when they're fighting. On your turn, you have to take a turn attacking the monster, whether it's by using a spell, attacking unarmed, or with a weapon. Weapons can be ranged, which is a separate roll. We'll get into that later. So that is a benefit that if the Congregant does well, everybody else does well, because she's so big that she can like bonk the enemy, and the enemy is a lot easier to hit afterwards. However, once you do that first round of turns, you just think that everybody gets to re-choose how they want to go. You wouldn't want the Congregant to go first again. You would put her at the end so that actually the Congregant goes first, everybody else goes, and then everybody else goes, and the congregant goes last. That way everybody gets the benefit twice of the congregant's one hit against the enemy. That's just one example of tons of different ways that you can kind of manipulate the game. Again, I use the text in this game to tell you the things that you can't do. Everything else is probably going to be within the rules of the game. Think expansively, think creatively, and you're going to find a lot of interesting things throughout this game. If the party arrives at a target that is just way too strong and you really don't want to fight, you can always flee from it, and by fleeing, everybody rolls one roll against it, and it's basically a dodge roll, and then you run away from it. If your dodge roll fails, you take damage from the target. If the target is magic, it only does 1 damage to you. It doesn't bounce around the whole team. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it's just better to fight. Sometimes it does actually make sense to run away. So you've, let's say you've all drawn your 6 characters. You pick the 2 to get rid of. Everybody has their 4 characters now. One little side note is if you have a character called the Reversed, they begin with a treasure called the Penitent Stone Arm, which is in the treasure deck. You'll need to search for that. And that is a very special ability that it's a weapon that gets stronger as you go along. That's just the special thing that the Reversed does. One thing I forgot to mention is that at the start of the game, all characters receive a Revenant Gift. Now, these begin dormant. You'll find them in the status effect deck. When your character has it, it doesn't give you any benefit, but when your character dies, you give that benefit to the a character that survives you, and then they receive the actual benefit of it. When your character comes back into the game at the end of a realm, you will then get your benefit back, and it will return into dormancy. So that's also a good thing to note, is that when characters die, they are gone from the game until the end of the realm. When the realm is over, you can redraw a character and add them back into the party. However, characters that are being added after this begin with nothing. They don't have any treasures or loot unless other cards say otherwise. So, in order to begin the game, you want to begin with your loadout, so to speak. Shuffle the decks like crazy because they are all they just need to be shuffled, just the way that I organize those files. You can start the game off in a number of different ways. For starters, the team always begins with 3 reroll counters and 3 rest cards. You'll never get more rest cards, but you're going to get a lot more reroll counters. Use them early and often. When you're resting, you can eat reroll counters for 2 health each, but you can also use them to reroll any failed roll. Literally, anytime a die is rolled, you can use a reroll counter, and that will come up later because you're going to be using the die a lot. When you're picking your loadout, you can pick a treasure card, which I have in white. Yours might look different. Or you can pick a loot card, which I have in yellow. If you get a loot card, you also get +1 reroll counter. And that can be really useful, especially at the start of the game when nobody has any deeper abilities to play. As the game goes on, it gets more complicated. You'll see. When you're picking treasures and picking loot, bear in mind. So you can pick 1 treasure or a loot plus a reroll counter. In the loot deck, there are 25 cards that say your search proves fruitless. There's nothing here for you. You can discard this. Which means that you don't get anything. When a monster drops a loot card and you get that, tough luck. Or you can spend a loot card and redraw. That's up to you. However, in the treasure deck, which is where all of the most valuable cards in the game are, there are 25 sin cards, which look like this for right now. They're going to look a little different later. Sin cards are very unique, and the rules around them are very strict. If you ever see a sin card, the first person who causes it to be revealed through any means, that's your sin. It binds to you permanently unless you find a way to absolve it, to have it forgiven. And there are very few chances to have that happen. Or you die, period. Sins bind to you. So if you are at God, I can't remember. Well, there's a realm called the Festering Fields of Sin, and the main challenge of that realm is at the end of every encounter, somebody in the party has to look at the top 7 cards of the treasure deck and put them on the bottom of the deck. When you do that, you are exposing yourself to seeing a sin card, which binds to you just like that. So if you ever see one, if you're building a when you arrive at a trader to trade items back and forth, if somebody reveals a sin, whoever causes it to be revealed, that's their sin. It's stuck to them. So the treasure deck is really valuable, but there's always going to be a risk at play here. So that's why one of the characters in the game is called the Crook. The Crook, after having lived a life of, sin, of course, their ability is every time that the Crook draws a treasure, they also get a loot. Which means that as the team fights a monster, the monster dies and drops its loot. Loot is always shared among everybody in the party. So if a monster drops 1 treasure, 1 loot, the team has to decide who gets it. If you have the Crook in your party, it behooves you to have the Crook draw that treasure, because then they automatically draw an extra loot. However, as you play, that means that the Crook is always going to be exposed to more treasures. There's a special rule that says when you have to draw and acquire the card for the Crook to actually get that ability. You don't get loot just by revealing cards, but that's an edge case. So the most powerful items in the game are in the treasure deck. In the loot deck, you're going to find a lot of cards that are consumable, really fast, moving out of your hand. Lots of usable items and things like that. During your turn, you can use 1 item. There are spells that you can use to attack the players, to attack the targets, rather. And as well as like weapons and all sorts of other things in here. There's just a lot of different ways. The game is very simple, but there are a lot of different ways of rearranging the terms throughout the game. You have a little bit of like art here to explain how this works. I know I already said it earlier, but if it has a little campfire, that means that this is a rest required card. You can see down here that there's the burn mark on the card telling you that this is a consumable. It also says up top, but I wanted to have a little bit of extra. And it also says that it weighs 1. So you need to keep in mind how many cards you can have in your hand at a time. So as you play, you're going to constantly be trying to find new and interesting ways of moving the cards around and figuring out the best way to play that benefits everybody. There are a number of rewards in the game. I already mentioned the reroll counters, the treasure, the loot. There's also going to be informational rewards, and sometimes it's like an opportunity or an activity reward. So sometimes a reward is simply that the next encounter is a pick from 2, or the next treasure is a pick from 3, things like that. One of the other rewards is a status effect. All status effects are good. They are pretty straightforward, and they are all going to benefit you by just keeping you safe in a variety of different ways. Crimson Membrane, which heals you a little bit every turn. However, if you keep getting hit, it will die and fall off. Black Ash will protect you on your first roll. Golden Veil will protect you from all of the next big chunk of damage that hits you. And White Chrism, which is like a baptism, and that will protect you from interplanar or phenomena type enemies. So if they do damage to you, you automatically do damage to them. That will come up a lot later because all of the final gods are interplanar. And I've seen a lot of the games so far where 1 or 2 people will have the White Chrism reward, and every time the god hits them, the god also takes 1 damage back. So everybody has their characters. They draw either 1 treasure or a loot plus a reroll counter. The team has 3 rest cards that are sitting face down on the deck. The reason I say that is because some of those rest cards are surprises that will make you quite upset. Then you need to figure out how to play the game. The game consists of the 5 realms that I mentioned earlier. These are going to look a lot cooler when you actually get the back art for them because it's very lore heavy. But for now, we have them set up like this. So this is a realm card. You have a big old chunk of text there. You have the level of difficulty over there, which is level 1. They go 1 through 5. And then you have the special rules on the bottom. Almost all realms are going to be made up of 5 encounters. So you draw the realm, you read it to people, you tell people what the rule does, and then you move on to the next thing, right? So let's say we drew the Blasted Ash Forest realm, and the realm here has the little bit of lore for it, and it says at the bottom, once per encounter, the party may select a held loot or treasure card and roll the d4. 1, you discard it. 2, you keep it. 3, discard it and replace it from the matching deck, which is, use that if you don't really like the thing that you have. Or 4, draw a card from the matching deck. So once per encounter, you get a little gamble. The first 10, the first realm of the game is always going to be easy. There's always just a nice, easy way of getting through the game. It gets harder as you go along, but I kind of wanted to use the first realm to teach people how to play. So when you start, you do difficulty 1, you go through the, let's say, 5 encounters, and then at the end of that, you draw the next realm from difficulty 2, and then you draw the next encounters again. You'll note that almost every single realm will have the last line of it say, the final encounter of this realm must be a combat encounter. That will come up a lot in the game where something has to be a combat encounter. And in order to do it, I have all my combat encounter, or I have all the pink encounters here that are face down. I'll do an above shot in a second. And if you need something to be a combat encounter, you just put a coin on top of it, and that will remind you that that has to be a combat encounter. As you get deeper into the game, sometimes you'll be putting multiple coins on top of an encounter to remind you that this combat encounter has plus X health, so that you remember that it's going to be tougher at the end of the game. That's kind of like a mini boss mechanic to keep you moving along. One more thing to note about encounters is that the first encounter of the game is always a pick from 3. That way you don't run the risk of starting the game off with an impossibly difficult encounter. You draw and reveal 3 encounters for the very first one, and then as a team you decide which one you want to fight first. Keep in mind, your first encounter of the game is going to be one where you have the lowest amount of items, but the highest amount of health that you're going to have throughout the whole game. So, fortune favors the bold. See what you can do. So, let's say we overturn our first encounter when we're playing the game. Okay, I don't know what happened to the clip. It got lost, so we're doing it again. It's 4 hours later, don't worry about it. The first encounter that I drew from the deck here, your first encounter of the game is always going to be a pick from 3. I'm just drawing this one at random to kind of show you how it works. We have a card here. It's called the Shimmering Gasp. It has a shield of 13. It does 2 damage, and it has 9 health. So the way that the shields work in this game is it's different than armor. Don't worry about it. They're 2 different things. The shield of 13 means that you need to roll the d20 and hit 13 or greater in order to hit it. The way that rolls work in the game is all of it is condensed into an individual player's turn. The monster never gets a turn to attack you. When you roll a combat roll, you're determining, do I hit it or does it hit me? So if you roll a 13 or greater on a combat roll, that's if you're using a melee weapon or attacking unarmed, and you do 13 or greater, you do hit it. If you do 1 to 12, you fail and it hits you. There are countless ways of changing the number on the die roll throughout the game, so you just kind of watch for those and you'll be moving them around a lot. You can also use a reroll counter to give it another shot. Throughout the game, you'll find that there are actually 2 other kinds of rolls. There are ranged rolls, which is, do I hit it or not? So if you are rolling a ranged roll and you don't hit 13, you don't actually take any damage. You just don't succeed in hitting the target. A lot of the ways that you do range rolls in this game are you roll range rolls like 5 times, and you have multiple opportunities to hit the card. And then almost always you follow with a dodge roll, which is basically do I escape damage. So in a range roll, you can hit it and still take damage. You can also not hit it and not take damage. You can do, it's, you know, kind of a Boolean thing on both sides. So with this one, you'll notice it has 2 damage. So normally it would mean that it would do 2 damage to you upon your failure to either dodge it or your failure on a combat roll, right? However, this one is magic. You'll see a lot of the cards in the game are described as having magic attacks. And what that means is it does 1 damage to you and then 1 damage to the person to your left. It's like a chain attack. So you'll see this goes really, really high sometimes. And so it can like zing around the board for a while. In this case, it's only 2, so it's just gonna boing from one to the next. If the person next to you has a dead character, the magic stops there and it doesn't continue around. Sometimes moving your character around, if you want to get up and move around the table, I can't stop you. That can be a way of kind of playing the game in an interesting way. The other thing we have here is that it says, when this dies, turn a forthcoming encounter into a pick from 2 and give a character Black Ash. Black Ash is a status effect that we already talked about. When you turn a forthcoming encounter into a pick from 2, you just take another face down encounter card and you put it on top, and then when you arrive at that encounter, you turn it over and the party picks. And when this dies, you can see the drops at the bottom here. It drops 2 reroll counters. So you just add that to the pile. And again, reroll counters are for everyone. Anyone can use them. You have to work as a team throughout the entire game. One last thing is this is a phenomena. So there are enemy types in the game. There are humans, beasts, interplanar, and phenomena. And each one has its own positives and negatives and types of stuff like that. And some people are better, like trappers in general, are better at fighting beasts. And there's just a lot of subdivisions throughout the game. So that's just a basic enemy. There's a lot of different types of enemies in this game, but everything is going to be explained to you on the cards themselves. So we have another encounter here, which is the Malconscious Mausolet Wanderer. It has an attack damage of 2. It has a shield of 8, super easy to hit, but it has 18 health, which is pretty high. And all incoming attack damage greater than 1 is reduced by 1. So if you're normally doing 2 damage, now you're just doing 1. It's always going to be reduced a little bit. When this dies, draw a combat encounter, gain its drops, and shuffle it back into the deck. This thing is like an enormous walking mausoleum. When it dies, not only do you get the drops that it has, but you get the drops of the corpse that's inside of it. That's kind of the idea. This already drops 1 treasure and 2 reroll counters, so it's a pretty valuable drop. Again, with that, if you fail, you're just going to take the 2 damage. If you succeed, this is for combat rolls, you would do your damage to it. -1 if your damage is greater than 1. All of this is explained on the cards. It will be very simple once you actually get into the flow of the game. I should also note that for the Malconscious Mausolet Wanderer, as with a lot of cards, it says draw a combat encounter and do X or Y. All encounters are in this deck. There's not a separate combat encounter deck. If it says draw a combat encounter, you just draw encounters until you find a combat encounter, and then you got it right there. So that will come up throughout the game. I wanted it to be a lot more streamlined than that, but the reality is that I already have 8 decks of cards in this game, and that's just a lot. So we're keeping all the encounters in one deck. Another thing to note in the game is that a lot of items will have armor. When you find an item with armor, say it has 6 armor, you should put 6 counters on top of it, 6 coins. When you take damage, the armor will give you 1 point reduction to it. So say your character has 3 damage coming towards them, and you have armor, you would reduce that to 2 damage against your body and reduce the armor's value by 1. When an armor has no counters left, it still works. As far as I know, check the rules. I might be changing this. Keep that in mind. Generally speaking, just for now, play it as the armor, as the item still works. It just doesn't give you any benefits. Because there's a ton of shields in the game that will say something like, this gives you some great benefit and has this armor. When it has no armor, you still get that benefit. Make sense? Say something. Also, armor is pooled, so you might have a bunch of different things with armor on it, and you take damage. You decide where the armor gets taken from. You don't have to, like, there's not like a first in, first out rule. You pick. So you've played through the game. You have your character cards. Everybody has their items. You've fought a bunch of monsters. You've gotten loot. You've done your time. If your team needs to play a rest card, you pull your rest card, you read it, and then everybody can use as many rest items as they want. You can you gain 3 reroll counters, and all reroll counters can be eaten for 2 points of healing each. And just as always, you can trade items amongst each other. You can trade items anytime in the game that is not the middle of battle. That's the only time that you can't trade items. So after battle, at a non-combat encounter, unless a card says otherwise, you can always be moving cards around from everybody else to help them build their character up. If you draw an encounter and the encounter says that it is a trader, that means that the party gets to see a NPC, so to speak, and trade their items for the items of the trader. This is optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to risk getting a sin, but if you do, what happens is the trader will have 4 loot cards that are all face up. You'll see them all. And then 4 treasure cards, and they are again all face up and everybody sees them. Anybody who wants one of them, you work together as a team. You have to trade 2 of the matching item for one of theirs. So if you want one of the treasures, you have to give the trader 2 treasures to get 1 back. Same thing with loot, 2 loot for 1 loot. And that is just a good way to spice up the game and to continue to get new things. That's also why you want to always try to have a silver tongue in your party if you can, because silver tongues get a lot of benefits from those traders. So you've gotten through 4 realms of the game. Everybody's really equipped. You might have rested, some people might have died. You've gotten to where you are. At the start of the 5th and final realm, you reveal which trader god you're going to fight. Shuffle the deck, pick one. Pretty simple. All trader gods are different, and they operate slightly differently than most other encounters. They have just, if you're doing a print and play version of the deck, this is just what the art looks like now. They'll be very different when it's in its final form. So we have the main one here. This is Kralesh, the arch trader against the human race, and I guess you can't really read that terribly well. Defense of 13, which is pretty high. Health of 55, which is like insane. The Kralesh, all gods will have their special ability that is always active. For Kralesh, it's called Furrows of Flesh, Rivers of Blood, and that is if Kralesh receives 5 damage on a turn, all characters gain 1 armor, because Kralesh is like this enormous mountain of meat. So you can use that to your advantage. Sometimes you can get a little bit of extra out of it. Sometimes those special powers actually hurt you. They can be pretty punishing. All attacks will trigger on failed combat or dodge rolls. So you'll notice that gods don't actually have traditional attack damage. They have differing attacks depending on how you fail. So it's like, like a Dark Souls fight where there's a lot of different types of attacks going on. For Kralesh, you'll notice rolls of 1 to 2 will be hit with the head of the hammer. Rolls of 3 to 10 get avalanches of flesh, and rolls of 11 to 12 get pin of the pick. And so each one of those has a different effect. That will only trigger on failed dodge rolls and failed combat rolls. So almost all of the ranged items in the game, those will have kind of an unlimited ability to do damage to the gods, but again, all ranged items in the game, with very few exceptions, will require you to do a dodge roll. The reason I did that is so with all of the melee weapons, you have your chance to attack, they have their chance to attack you. The benefit of a ranged weapon is that you get multiple chances to do slightly less damage than normal and only one risk to your own health. So having a diverse party will really help you when you get to this, and having White Chrism too. When the god is reduced to 0 health, you've won. That's it. That's the whole game. There's obviously an enormous amount of replay value with the number of different characters in here. And also, for the time being, please play this by the rules that I've given you. But if you have ideas, if you want to play it with your own home rules, go nuts. I mean, these are your cards. I can't stop you. That's the whole idea. I do expect there to be like a few changes to the overall rules as I go on. I will have a few, almost certainly, notes written into the to the description of this video, and I will be updating the rules sheet as I go along. If you've made a print and play version of this deck, there might even be like patch notes as I go along. But for right now, this is the game as it stands. One thing I forgot to mention is that this is approximately what the game would look like when it's all laid out, just on a larger table. This is just the table I only have available, right? So we have the full deck of encounters here. We have the rest cards here. You'd really only need 3 out. I just have those here to show. You have your 4 characters in different corners. You have all of the encounters of the realm. The realm is here, and because the realm's rule says the final encounter must be a combat encounter, I've put a little marker on that. I also have the coins as well, trader gods you don't need until the end, treasures and loot, and just as a visual, when I was explaining earlier, when you have your health, so this one would have 8 health, like that. As you lose health, you just want to like move it up. You know, you lose 2 health, you lose 3. You don't want to just keep throwing them back in, because that, you know, you're always going to be getting more health back. Also, wherever the party wants it, you have your reroll counters in a separate part of the world here. So, approximate structure of the game looks like this. As cards get discarded, you'll want to have other piles near them, because there are a few things in the game that just say, you know, look through the discard deck. You can always put them on the bottom of the deck, but there are some edge cases where that might not be helpful. And you would want to definitely have a separate part of the deck for the discard encounter cards. So make sure that you, as you defeat monsters, you put them aside here, and you keep them in a separate spot in the game. That will come in later on. So if you've read all of the rules and you've watched this entire video and you still have questions, just DM me or email me or find me through one way or another, and I can answer those questions for you. And if I don't get back to you immediately, just make up something that seems right and figure it out on your own. This game is, I think, pretty straightforward. You'll just have to play it for yourself and see how you feel. Thanks for watching.